Okay, this is going to look at part 2. So we now know what the fossil record is. We know sort of how a fossil forms and that kind of thing. What we're going to look at with this are the stories that the fossil record tells about the Earth and how changes have happened over time. So if we look at this particular organism, of course, we're looking at specific characteristics, and scientists are looking at those to make inferences, which means sort of a prediction, a suggestion about what they think used to be that organism used to have as an environment. And they're looking at their structure, the organism structures, and would it have swam, would it have walked, that sort of thing. If there were any remnants in its belly, it could have seen what it ate. So there's lots of things that fossils can tell us. If it didn't decompose completely, then the skin tissue would have a helpful feat in that, and that's that kind of thing as well. So, when we look at the fossil record, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of dates out there. And so, in order for scientists to try to keep it better organized, they use what they've called a geologic time scale. And this is just something that is like a book. A book starts on page 1 and ends at the very last page. Well, we're still writing the Earth's history, or the Earth's history is still writing itself. So, right now, we're on the last page as of right now today, but then tomorrow, another page gets added. So the geologic time scale is a continuously evolving piece of scientific equipment that scientists use. And as it says, that they've used this to sort of make sense of the last 4.6 billion years worth of history that they believe that the planet has been here since its formation. So every time that you see one of these little lines going across the page, that means that there's been a reason to draw that line. Why have scientists decided that this was going to be the end of the Cretaceous period and the start of another? What do all these things on the left-hand side represent? The Precambrian versus the Phanerozoic, or the Archean, and all these. So these are different eons, there's different eras, and they break these down into bigger chunks and smaller chunks. There's a Brain Pop video that does a good job at sort of explaining this. I'm not going to do that right now, but if you want a better understanding of that, that might be something that you look at as one of those supplemental videos. So let's go ahead and look at this introduction to the geologic time scale. The gentleman here that does this video does not go into great detail about eons and eras, but instead is showing you how the Earth has changed over time. So he's showing you sort of a quick summation of 4.6 billion years worth of history, and how where basically humans are in that 4.6 billion, when photosynthesis started, that kind of thing. So it's pretty interesting. Let's watch.
How do I even wrap my mind around that length of time?
That's a good question.
Good question.
How can you imagine 4.5 billion years? And how does that compare to the amount of time that humans have been around? A geologist gave us the idea to use a football field as a metaphor, and that's exactly what we're going to do. At this end zone, we've got the present, and at this end zone is the moment our planet formed. Earth's entire history stretches the full 100 yards in between. Every inch is 1.3 million years. Let's start at the beginning and take a walk through Earth's entire history. For the first few 100 million years, the Earth was bombarded by rocks from outer space, but now it's starting to calm down. And way up here, 3.8 billion years ago, life begins. We're talking simple life, single cells floating in a vast ocean. Now these cells are figuring out new ways to get energy. They're evolving to harness the power of the sun. Photosynthesis starts past the 20-yard line. The air here is mostly carbon dioxide and nitrogen, but right around here, little green cells start making oxygen. And up here, about 2.3 billion years ago, oxygen starts building up in the atmosphere. We're halfway down the field and we just got the kind of atmosphere that humans can breathe. For the next 1.5 billion years, it's paradise for single cells of every variety. But as we move down the field, cells start working together. And by the time we reach the 18-yard line right here, there's lots of complex critters floating around. It's 800 million years before the present, and things are about to get really interesting. Here at the 13-yard line, we've got an ozone layer. And here, a sudden explosion of diversity. Fungi, sea anemones, mollusks. 530 million years ago, animals take their first steps on land. In the ocean, fish appear, land plants, insects, sharks, amphibians. It's been 4 billion years since we started, and here at the 5-yard line, we're just starting to see the first mammals and dinosaurs. We see Stegosaurus dinosaurs right here about 176 million years ago, but we don't see the T-Rex until about 4.5 feet from the end zone, about 68 million years ago. Look, the T-Rex is closer to us in the present than it is to the Stegosaurus way back there. Whoa, and there's a catastrophe at the 1-yard line. 66 million years ago, a meteor, or volcanoes, or climate change, or all three, killed 75% of all species. But life rallies. This yard is the yard of mammals. We've got armadillos, giant whales, wolves, and here a foot away, the great apes, our family. Hippos, mammoths, lions, Lucy, almost human but not quite, saber-toothed tigers, cattle. Then 200,000 years ago, this is where we find humans that look like us. That's just 1/8 of an inch from the end zone, the width of this light bulb. This is all of human experience, but everything we call civilization, agriculture, cities, books, science, these don't appear until we're 2 hairs breadth from the end zone. The width of this filament.
Okay, so hopefully that provides you a little bit of information on just how recent, really, complex life has been here. So after scientists have determined the age of fossils using either relative dating or absolute dating, or really a combination of both is what they use, they have to organize them into date order just like we would do anything else. After they do this, then they get that picture, and that puzzle pieces are still missing, but they begin to see a clearer identification of what's happening. So these are the 3 things that they really pay attention to. They start looking at when things just sort of disappear off the fossil record and never show up again. We call this extinctions. And basically, like I said, each one of these lines are where we see changes in organisms, and that's because we're looking at those fossils, and then we see different features show up or disappear. And we've sort of looked at how that happens. Sometimes, like in letter B, it says they appear for the first time. They didn't used to be around, and then voila, there they are. So he sort of showed that to you in that video, you know, when flowers were here, when we first saw different types of dinosaurs, and they weren't always here. So why did they just suddenly show up? And then letter C, specifically, we're looking at those changes from one time period to another, and sometimes they're very, very drastic changes. Sometimes they're less drastic, and that's why we have different eons. It's why we have different eras. And sometimes those changes are more subtle, and other times they're very drastic in what's going on. So let's sort of see an example of the rock record. Grand Canyon we've talked about a lot. This actually shows us about 2 billion years worth of Earth's history, and these are really nice sedimentary layers, which is why they're going to tell us a good story. Of course, we have other things going on in there. They're not just sedimentary rock, but for the most part, that's what we're looking at, especially for fossils. There is a video that is attached as a supplemental video, so you may want to look at that. But this is just one of the many scenarios that we have on our planet and why so many geologists spend their time there. So once you find these fossils, and you know they're very rarely ever all grouped up together. Sometimes you get a complete fossil. Most of the time you don't. So what do the pieces tell you? What do the teeth tell you? What does the bone structure tell you? Did they have fins? Did they have limbs? What was going on? So that's what those fossils are that scientists are trying to determine is telling us. Here we actually have a desert region, in present day desert region, and yet we have petrified wood. And so if you remember that piece of rock that I said was a piece of petrified wood, looked a lot like this. It has a lot of iron in it. So what are trees doing out in the middle of a desert? And they're, good sized trees. So that's just sort of a suggestion that maybe this area wasn't always desert-like. And I know we have a couple of little scrub trees in the background, but that is nothing compared to what we're looking at with this petrified forest that we have had here. Definitely not forest material. So what are they telling us? That is what we're trying to figure out. So we use these fossils to interpret the past. When we talk about an extinction, these are 3 organisms that have went extinct in time. They no longer are here. Of course, we know that, but we also have evidence of them in a fossil record, so we know that they did exist. So when we talk about an extinction, of course, it means that it's the death of every member of a species, the dodo bird here being the most recent extinct organism on this page. So if we look at this particular picture down here at Site 2, if you look at layer W, these are aquatic organisms, meaning that they lived in the water. Then we have this layer X here, and this is actually an igneous rock layer. And remember, igneous rock isn't gonna have fossils in it because they would have melted, burned up. They're not going to survive it. But then we have another rock layer above it. So after we had some lava extrusions, whatever may have happened, V is an intrusion. So this actually is the youngest rock layer through here. But once we have these other rock layers that have settled on top of them, then we see a big change. We no longer see aquatic organisms. We now see land-based organisms. We've got plants, we have animals walking. And so that's really important in what scientists are looking for when they see this. Number one, what happened here? Of course, if it's igneous rock, we get an idea, but what was happening on the planet during that time? So definitely tells a story. There were lots of what we call mass extinction events, and there's a video, another supplemental video, and this one's pretty good, that talks about just how common extinctions are, mass extinctions. And when we talk about mass extinctions, we're not just looking at 1 or 2 organisms that are going extinct, but a significant number of species that decreases to 0, goes to 0, nothing's left, for a multiple number of organisms in a very, very short period of time. So there were a couple of mass extinction events, and I've sort of marked them on here, and it gives you some details on the screen, and you can stop it and read it if you're more interested. But I just want to sort of identify this one, the Ordovician Silurian extinction. 86% of life was wiped out, and that's just of the fossils that we have found. When we look at the next layer, like we said, 86% of those fossils don't show up again. So something drastic happened here. And this scenario sort of goes on to talk about what happened to cause that extinction to take place. Another mass extinction during the late Devonian period. So once again, this line through here separating what kind of organisms were not around. Loss of life, 75%. So what we saw in one rock layer below compared to the rock layer above was significantly less, once again. Now, that doesn't mean that other organisms didn't change, because we do see that changing if you continue to read on the screen. Another mass extinction, the third one, the Permian-Triassic extinction. Once again, we had a significant loss of life, 96% they believe due to volcanic eruptions. And of course, you have volcanic material, igneous rock there to sort of show that. But they call this the Great Dying, when there was only about 4% of the species. So almost a total annihilation of our planet, both land and ocean. And that's one of the most significant ones. This one was not as big, the Triassic and the Jurassic, of course, during the dinosaur ages. But once again, it says marine life that included reptiles, coral reefs suffered the most casualties. And it says plants managed to survive. And so within these bombardments of volcanoes and asteroid impacts and everything, that was probably very significant, of course, that those plants did make it, because it needed to supply food for the rest of us. Not us, because humans were not at that particular point. And then another mass extinction, number 5, the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, was the basically when we see the dinosaurs having completely died out, we believe, and really the age of mammals start. So if you look at here, you see the first mammals. They would have been really, really tiny, and they would have started at the end of the dinosaur reign there. But when that happened, of course, it would have just been the small mammals and nothing large. So that was a significant change to the planet itself. So what causes these mass extinctions to occur? There's a lot of different things. Of course, it could be a catastrophic events. Asteroid impacts can cause significant and violent change. Multiple violent volcanic eruptions, tsunamis. I mean, there's lots of things that can cause this. They call this basically catastrophism, and scientists do. But a lot of times they don't just happen all at the same time. It's happening slowly, gradually, over a period of time. And so we call this uniformitarianism, or scientists do. And what that means is that the planet has changed slowly over time and will continue to slowly change. Yes, we're going to have catastrophes, and that's going to just sort of be included along with these gradual events that the planet has undergone based on what we've seen in the fossil record. So climate change, whether it's ice ages that are happening or whether it's a warming event like we happen to be seeing right now. We've been in many ice ages on this planet. We've had many warming events. And so those are things that typically happen all the time based on what we see in the fossil record. There is a video that goes along with this. It says, when will the next ice age happen? So that one's sort of looking at how ice ages have happened, and then warming events happen right behind them. Changes in ocean currents typically cause a lot of these climate changes, and other events which based on carbon dioxide emissions, and the video talks about what happens during an ice age. It stores up carbon dioxide, and therefore you can't get as warm. Plate movements, mountains forming, oceans forming, well, that's going to cause changes in current. That's going to cause some areas to get separated and isolated, and so that causes a lot of problems. This is a really, really, really good video, what happens when continents collide, another supplemental video that I'll be posting as well, that I would highly suggest you watch. And then accumulation of sediments, of course, is just going to cover up these materials and add to, like we've seen in the Grand Canyon. So those are going to be what causes these changes to happen. And then, of course, the fossils that are left behind tells that story, along with the rocks, of course, as well. But environmental changes we see, of course, I showed you that petrified forest. These are actually areas that we have had glacial glacial materials that have been left behind. So we know that this area was really cold. This is a video that is of the Gray fossil site that I have as a supplemental video as well. And this is showing this top picture here, a picture of you can't see it there, but here it is, a picture of a trilobite. And they're finding it at the top of a mountain, which is basically like what we find here in the Appalachian Mountains. So when we look at these plants and animals, we use them to reconstruct the Earth's past climate. No, we weren't here. We are making our best guesses, if you want to say, but it is using those fossils to try to tell the story. So we look at similarities in organisms today and see, well, what kind of structures do they have, and where do these organisms live? Could they withstand these types of temperatures? So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at, because a lot of areas are going to have very much different conditions, just like we right here used to be in a shallow ocean before Pangea collision actually occurred. This is fossils in the Green River Formation. This is out west in parts of Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. This is actually part of an ancient lake system, and as you can see, there is a river that runs through here. This is the Green River, but there is not a series of lakes. There is a very limited water source other than this river that flows through this area. So this particular region is where they find millions of fossils, just layer upon layer, and these are some really unique ones that actually has preserved some of the most delicate structures, from fern fronds to the wings, the little teeny tiny vertebrae of the turtle, the fins, and almost the skin structure of the fish itself. So these are really, really phenomenal. This is a snake and all the vertebrae of that snake. This is a type of turtle that would have existed back then as well. So lots of different unique features that tells a story about how this environment was significantly different. And then this is looking at how you look at organisms in one rock layer above, below, and between. And these are three different types of trilobites right here in the three left pictures. You see that they have similar body structures, but they're also uniquely different. And so that's what scientists are looking for, is what is going to cause these organisms to slightly change. And we watch organisms change in our environment today. And that's another standard that looks a little bit more at that. Here's two different types of starfish. Why why are these organisms found in deeper rock layers looking a little bit more different than starfish that are found in rock layers here and really present day starfish. So what they're doing is looking at how these organisms may have had to have these adaptations in order to have survived in an environment that is very different than ours today. There are some practice problems that you will find on my webpage, and that is what you will see on these subsequent slides. So if you want to pull that up, you can actually look at these, and then that way you can sort of check your answers. I'll have a separate little supplemental video to show you the answers to these questions here, along with a lot of other ones that you can see as well.